Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. And today's show is super special. This is the 500th episode of The Daily Gardener. I know, right? Woohoo! Clapping, yay! All right, it's time for today's garden history. It was on this day, June 1st, back in 1785, that Noah Webster, of Webster's Dictionary fame, boarded a little ship named George in Baltimore. And he stopped in Norfolk, Virginia. And when he was there, he was able to eat some cherries for the very first time. And he must have liked them because cherry trees were added to his orchard. Noah Webster was a fierce gardener. He enjoyed his time in the garden. He planted all kinds of vegetables, parsnips, carrots, cucumbers, beets, and potatoes. In fact, later on in his dictionary, Noah Webster defined potatoes as one of the cheapest and most nourishing vegetables. And then he got a little spiritual about the potato. He wrote, "In the British dominions and in the United States, the potato has proved to be one of the greatest blessings bestowed on man by the Creator." Noah Webster was also a fan of farming. He called farming the most necessary, the most healthy, the most innocent, and the most agreeable employment of men. Noah Webster had a property in Amherst, and over the years, he gradually acquired land around his property until he had around 10 acres. Now, on this land, Noah built a barn, he had a chase house, and he also planted a magnificent garden. And everyone in Amherst knew that Noah Webster's orchard was the best in the town. Noah grew pears, he had apple trees and peach trees, and he even grew sweet white grapes. Noah Webster. And it was on this day, June 1st in 1859, that Calvin Fletcher, the American attorney, banker, farmer, and state senator for the great state of Indiana, wrote in his diary, "This is a beautiful day. My early corn 1 foot high, early potatoes set for blossom, early tomatoes 6 and 8 inches high, grapes in full blossom, 2 messes of green peas, the grass in the yard cut 1 week ago, raspberries nearly full grown, currants ditto. The former, raspberries, are good size, and the latter, the currants, were still on the small side." And today we wish a happy heavenly birthday to Henry Beston, the American writer and naturalist. He was born on this day, June 1st, in 1888. Well, last week, I discovered Henry Beston when I was researching his wife, the writer and poet Elizabeth Coatsworth. And I have to say, it was a thrill getting to know both of them. But Henry is best remembered for his book called The Outermost House. This was a book that he wrote in 1928. And he wrote it during a period of time, a year, that he spent on the great beach of Cape Cod. He basically isolated himself in a house on the beach, and he devoted himself to writing about life along the shore. Henry wrote his book in longhand at a kitchen table, and it was during this time, this year, when he was sequestered in this house, that he actually met his future wife, Elizabeth, and the two of them met at a garden party. And later on, when he proposed marriage to Elizabeth, she told him, "No book, no marriage." And so that was extra incentive to finish his book. Now, Henry and Elizabeth went on to have 2 little girls, and their daughter, Kate, ended up becoming a respected author and poet in her own right. And I wanted to read a little excerpt from her poem called Old Roses, which is about how her parents met. Kate wrote, "When my father met my mother at a dinner party in a garden of very old roses on Beacon Hill one hot evening in early June, he said to his friend, F. Morton Smith that night. Morton, I have met the girl I'm going to marry. We have Uncle Morton's testimony for that, the certified word of a Boston lawyer. My mother said my father had looked handsome, yes, and talked delightfully. But what she remembered were the mosquitoes. If you stopped slapping at them, even for a second, you were eaten up alive. Isn't that a great poem? Old Roses by Kate Barnes. Well, back to Henry Beston. Henry wrote many different books, and of course, most of them are about nature. But there was one garden book that caught my attention, and it's called Herbs and the Earth. And in this book, Henry wrote, "A garden of herbs is a garden of things loved for themselves, in their wholeness and integrity. It is not a garden of flowers, but a garden of plants which are sometimes very lovely flowers and are always more than flowers." Isn't that a great quote about herbs? Well, the more I read about Henry Beston, the more it becomes apparent to me that Henry was a very deep thinker. And he thought about gardening on a much deeper level. And I think it's because Henry was so grounded in the tenets of nature. Listen to how Henry describes watering plants. This is a perspective that I have not heard before. Henry wrote, "If gardeners will forget a little the phrase watering the plants and think of watering as a matter of watering the earth under the plants, keeping up its moisture content, and gauging its need, the garden will get on very well." And isn't that the truth? Well, before we say goodbye to Henry Beston today, I thought I would share this little delightful quote of his. It's about fall. "The leaves fall, the wind blows, and the farm country slowly changes from the summer cottons into its winter wools." And today we also remember Helen Keller, the American author, disability rights advocate, and lecturer. She died on this day, June 1st, in 1968. Helen lost both her sight and her hearing when she was a little toddler at the age of 19 months. And in the years before she met her wonderful teacher, she would turn to nature whenever she was frustrated. She was like her father that way. They both enjoyed being outdoors, and the Keller family garden was a place where Helen could go to find solace. Helen once wrote, "People often have no idea how fair the flower is to the touch, nor do they appreciate its fragrance, which is the soul of the flower." And Helen also wrote, "I feel the delightful, velvety texture of a flower and discover its remarkable convolutions, and something of the miracle of nature is revealed to me." Helen's favorite flower was the peony. And if you think about holding a peony and you think about the fragrance of a peony, it's no wonder why that flower had a special appeal to her. Helen once said, "Since my childhood, I have adored them and have been glad each spring when the miracle of their bloom has been wrought again." Helen Keller retired from public life in 1961, and she spent the last 7 years of her life walking in her garden and reading books. After Helen died of a heart attack on this day, June 1st in 1968, her ashes were placed beside her dear friend and teacher, Annie Sullivan, at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. Helen was once asked if she believed in heaven, and she replied, "Most certainly, it is no more than passing from one room into another. But there's a difference for me, because in the other room, I will be able to see." It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, The Pig by Robin Hutson. This book came out in 2019, and the subtitle is Tales and Recipes from the Kitchen Garden and Beyond. Well, I think Tom Parker Bowles hit it on the head with his review of this book. He writes, "The Pig revolutionized the country house hotel, creating a true home away from home. No pomp or pretense, just beautiful and magnificent food with produce from their kitchen gardens. And where the pig goes, the others follow." And here's what the publisher wrote about this book: "A stylish, practical guide to living the good life. Among the pages of The Pig, you will find an idiosyncratic, seasonal approach to the good life with delicious recipes, how-to guides, lists, panels, and stories." And the chapters include one that's called Out in the Garden. And in this chapter, they talk about the benefits of growing 12 types of mint. So right there, we're talking about a very serious kitchen garden. There's also an essay on the sweetness of carrots. Yes, please. And then also how to make your own sack garden, and then a recipe for the gardener's sandwich. And I'm not going to ruin it. I'm not going to disclose that here. But yes, there is a recipe for the gardener's sandwich, and it's fantastic. Now, I thought what I would do is share how Robin introduces the restaurant, The Pig, and the journey that the entire pig family has been on this past decade. It's quite the story. So here goes. We opened The Pig back in July of 2011, although in some respects, it feels a whole lot longer ago than that. One thing's for sure, we've learned a lot along the way. For a start, we've become experts in growing our own and making the most of what we produce. We know how to seek out small artisan producers and work with them to bring some amazing ingredients to the table. We've also discovered how to keep bees and make delicious honey, and we've even perfected the art of building smokehouses. Now we smoke everything in sight, from salmon and salt to beetroot and beef. Beyond the kitchen and the garden, we've learned how to infuse just about anything into gin and vodka and have become past masters at upcycling junk shop treasures. And the purpose of this book is to share with you some of our discoveries. Now, I also have to share with you this next little part, because if you have a vision of a working kitchen garden on a grand scale, let's say you have a restaurant of your own or dreams of a restaurant, or you just want to amp up your kitchen garden, listen as Robin tells us what it takes to make it all work at The Pig. This was quite astounding, I thought. We'd heard horrible stories of kitchen gardens at other hotels where the garden produce was left to perish in the soil because there was no shared vision between the chef and the gardener. See, I already thought that was very key, such a good insight. And I think this is important for the home gardener as well, because sometimes when it comes to kitchen gardens, we can talk a good game, but when it comes to actually using what we're planting in the kitchen garden, well, we can often fall short. So right here, right now, I thought this was fantastic insight from Robin. But let me continue on here. Robin writes, "Happily, we've seen no such sorry sights in our gardens. In fact, the bond between garden and kitchen, headed up by Ollie, our senior kitchen gardener, and James, our chef director, is so strong that there now exists an almost obsessional culture for all things homegrown, homemade, and local." So I love that. The kitchen garden has just been integrated into everything that they do. Robin continues, "Certainly on day one of The Pig, back in the summer of 2011, we didn't envisage the garden team that we have today, with around 20 kitchen gardeners working across several acres of productive gardens and our own plant nursery for seedlings. So these gardeners are doing double duty. They're helping out with The Pig, but they're also helping out at the nursery. Now, the gardens didn't just play a major part in influencing the food style and the menus, but many other aspects of the overall operation too. So Isn't this book just a treasure? I tell you what, there were so many times when I was going through this book that I had to just stop and make some notes to myself about how I want to integrate my own gardens more deeply into my life. And I do a gardening podcast. I talk about gardening and read about gardening all the time. But there is something about the way Robin has broke this down and systematized it that has just really gotten to me. So this book to me is a complete treasure. Now, the other thing I'll tell you about this book is that I love the way it's written. Let me share with you just one simple recipe, and you'll get a feel for the writing in this book and just how compelling Robin can make anything sound. So here's a glimpse of one of my favorite recipes from this book. It's perfect for summer, and it's called Judy's Tomatoes on Toast. I know, I'm already hungry for it. So here's what Robin wrote. You might think you know what tomatoes on toast tastes like, but believe me, once you've tried this version, you'll never have it any other way. It's one of our all-time favorites at home. The tomatoes are so juicy and buttery, and the sourdough toast has just the right combination of crispness and chewiness. Of course, the big thing here is the quality of the tomatoes, which can be a little bit of a challenge here in the UK, especially in the winter. I love the Isle of Wight tomatoes. This is what is written here, so now I have to try those. It's on my bucket list. And then it says, they come in different varieties from some of the best growers in the UK, and they are fairly local to us as well, which is a bonus. So here's what you need to make Judy's Tomatoes on Toast. 2 big knobs of salted yellow butter, plus extra for the toast. So Judy loved butter, apparently. And then 2 pounds of the ripest, sweetest, medium-sized tomatoes that you can get. Roughly chop them. And then it says that you can add a splash of Worcestershire sauce if you want. This is optional. It was not in Judy's version. But then Robin says, I sometimes add some if I'm feeling a bit wild. Woohoo! I love that. And then you need 4 large slices of very holy sourdough bread. And for this, I would go to the bakery section of my grocery store because I love their homemade sourdough there. It's very good. And then, of course, salt and pepper. So you melt the butter in a saucepan over low heat and then cook that gently for 10 minutes. Don't let them boil. Just simmer them, cook them nicely. And then while that's happening, you're going to toast your bread until it's a nice dark color and then put some more butter on your bread. And by then, the tomatoes should be done. Robin says they should be halfway between solid and soup. And then you pour that on your toast and away you go. And I know I take mine right out the deck door and sit out on the deck and look at the lake and listen to the birds. It's fantastic. And your company will love it too. Now, one other thing that I wanted to try in this review of Robin's book is to just randomly flip to a letter in the index of this book, because there is just so much in this book. It's hard to convey just all of the wonderful goodness that you'll find in these pages. So I just flipped to the letter H, and let me just read to you what's in the book for the letter H. And just this letter alone will tell you the breadth and depth of this book. So for H, there are hazelnuts, and under hazelnuts, there is a nettle salsa verde, which apparently has some hazelnuts in it. There is also a salt-baked celeriac salad, which I don't know how I missed, but now that I just read that to you, I want to check that out. There are some pages devoted to hens and herbs. Under herbs, there is garden herb oil, growing herbs, winter savory. Then there's a whole section on herbal healing, infusions, planters, in pots. There's sections on basil, lemon verbena, mint, and rosemary. Then there's an herby popcorn. So yay, that sounds fantastic. There's a section on honey clotted cream, and horseradish toasts, and then making horseradish sauce. And so that's just H. So this book is incredible. There is just so much in it. And the cover is so simple. It's just a plain cover. You would never know that all this goodness lies inside. but it does. This book is 304 pages of Robin Hutson's The Pig. It's incredible. You can get a copy of The Pig by Robin Hutson and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $10. Okay, and I'm just going to be honest with you and say that I found a used copy a couple of weeks ago for $8. So I snagged that right away. But if you are serious about getting a used copy at a lower price, then you're going to want to act quickly because those copies are going to go quickly. Otherwise, you can get a brand new hardcover for $40. But I tell you what, this book is worth every penny. I kid you not. So there you go. And if you have a summer birthday, this is something you should definitely put on your list. All right, we end the show today with a botanic spark that has a happy ending, but also speaks to the potential dangers of gardening. It was on this day, June 1st in 1917, that a garden accident occurred in West Scranton, Pennsylvania. And the story was reported in the 11th volume of a magazine called The Coal Age. Here's what it said. While Mrs. Theodore Barton was pulling weeds in her garden on June 1st, the ground suddenly gave way under her, and she landed in an old abandoned mine gangway that was 18 feet below. Now, a mine gangway is the highway of the mine, and it's a permanent and often fortified part of the mine. It's heavily timbered on the sides and the roof. And so this event of Mrs. Barton falling through a gangway was actually quite unusual, although I'm sure it was terribly frightening. Well, the article continues and says that a number of neighbors heard Mrs. Barton screaming for help, and they ended up rescuing her after considerable effort. So all's well that ends well. But I tell you what, the garden can still be a place where things can happen. I know last fall I had a terrible fall in my garden. I actually ended up face planting right into the hard ground. It was early November. And I remember laying there thinking, am I still alive? I'm not kidding. It was such an abrupt fall. I didn't even have time to brace myself. But it underscored something that I always tell my student gardeners and gardeners in general, and that is that it's always a good idea to have your phone on you, not only for taking pictures of all the wonderful plants and flowers that you're working with, but also for your personal safety when you're in the garden. All right, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening to this 500th episode of The Daily Gardener. And if you enjoy the show, please take a second and share it with a garden friend. That would really mean a lot. And just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.